All right, well, we are going to go ahead and move into our final presentation, which is very important, I think, to everybody on the line, and that is legal and financial resources um, with Jonathan Martinis. So he is the Senior Director for Law and Policy for the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University, and it's leading its efforts to ensure that older adults and people with disabilities have access to the services and supports that they need to lead independent and inclusive lives. In 2013, Jonathan represented Margaret Jenny Hatch in the Justice for Jenny case, the first trial to hold that a person has the right to use supported decision making to make her own life choices instead of being subjected to a permanent plenary guardianship. And since then, Jonathan has led SDM projects in New York, Ohio, California, Virginia, Vermont, and DC. He has also educated and trained thousands of older adults, people with disabilities, families, and professionals across the country on SDM theory and practice. So, Jonathan, thank you for being with us today. I'll let you go ahead and share your screen and present your PowerPoint.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Martinis. It's my pleasure to be here today. I am working on the technology, always a struggle for me, but there it is. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you today. What I'm going to talk to you about over the next roughly 45 minutes are options that people have to increase opportunities for people with disabilities throughout the lifespan. A quick warning. I'm going to give you about 6 hours of material in 45 minutes. I apologize for flying through this, but number one, I have shared my slide deck already with the host, and they are free to send this to anyone they want. And number two, you will have my email address at the end of this presentation, and you should feel free to contact me with any questions. So let's begin. The first thing I want you to think about are rights. Rights are not something that people really think very much about, what they really mean to us. I want to focus on 3 specific things that I think mean the most to us as Americans and really mean the most for people with disabilities. And when I say that, I mean this. People without disabilities really don't think about their rights that much because they're just something that we have. So when we see this famous phrase on your screen now from the Declaration of Independence, that the people are endowed with certain unalienable rights like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it's just something that we know, we've learned about it in school, but we don't think about what it really means, how it means that we have the right to chart our own path, to choose the lives we live, the liberty we enjoy, and the happiness we pursue. Then we get to the Americans with Disabilities Act, because I'll tell you this, in a legal sense, people with disabilities did not have these rights until 1990. People with disabilities were openly and repeatedly discriminated against under color of law. There are stories and there is testimony about people with disabilities not being allowed to go to school, not being able because there was no accessibility to go to the parts of their community, and of course being kept in institutions against their will. In 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act changed it. They said once and for all that just having a disability does not and cannot diminish or reduce everyone's right to be full and equal participants in all aspects of life and in all parts of society. And then the famous Olmstead decision really brought it home. That case was about whether people could be kept in institutions, but like I'm going to show you, it goes all the way through life, because what the late Justice Ginsburg said in Olmstead was that when people are kept locked up, when people don't have opportunities, when they have no choice on where to live, that perpetuates assumptions about all people with disabilities, that they can't do things or shouldn't be allowed or able to do things, that they should be kept apart from everyday life activities, shouldn't have the same options or opportunities to do social and work opportunities, to have economic independence or educational advancement. All this not because of what people with disabilities can or can't do, but because of what society assumes. So when I talk to you about rights, I think all of our rights come down to one thing, whether you have or don't have disabilities, and that's choice. Like the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre says on your screen right now, we are all our choices. Our choices make us who we are. They say who we are, who we want to be, and who we don't want to be, where we want to go and what we want to avoid. Choice is what makes our rights worth it. Without choice, there's no rights. I mean, think about it. Freedom of speech is the right to choose what to say. Elections are the right to choose who will govern us. And things like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are all about choice. And when we say choice, and I always use the phrase the right to make choices as the most powerful one we have, there's a clinical phrase called self-determination, and you're going to hear me say that a lot today. But what self-determination just means is having choices and making choices, being in control of your life. When people make more choices, they are the causal agents. They do things instead of having things done to them. They act instead of being acted upon. Self-determination is the power and the right to make choices. And here's something that we know from more than 40 years of studies, a couple of them on your screen right now. But we know this beyond any shadow of a doubt. When people with disabilities have more self-determination, when they make more choices, they have better lives. We know this from study after study after study. People with disabilities with more self-determination who are exercising their right to make choices are more likely to be employed, more likely to be independent, more likely to be educated, more likely to be healthier and safer. So remember this throughout the rest of this presentation, and I hope for the rest of your lives. Self-determination is the key to a better quality of life for people with disabilities. Remember this, self-determination is the key to education, to independence, to employment, and to community integration. And that's important because everything we do, knowing that, should come back to that. So let's take a trip through life. Now, outside of the home, where is the first place that we all learn how to deal with other people and how to make choices and live our lives? School, right? Well, for people with disabilities, there is special education through a law called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And I want you to look at, what you're looking at on your screen is the very first section of IDEA. And it tells you the entire purpose of special education. If you've been involved in special education, you could tell me 10 different things its purpose is. Inclusion, mainstreaming, access to the curriculum, but this is what the law says. And the bold words are the most important. The whole point of special education is to help prepare students with disabilities for further future education, employment, and independent living. And what do we know is the key to education, employment, and independent living? Self-determination. Up on your screen are quotes from 3 different studies that were commissioned and paid for by the U.S. Department of Education. Look at the conclusions. Self-determination is the ultimate goal of education. It's a best practice, and schools should focus on students' abilities to make choices, make decisions, and exercise self-determination. So if you are a parent of a child in special education, these are my recommendations for you. Start seeking self-determination supports and services as early as possible. And when I mean as early as possible, I mean day one. I've always believed that students with disabilities should attend their IEP meetings. Lots of schools I hear don't encourage it. I think that's absurd. Your child, your student should be there as long as he or she can be there from as early as he or she can. I've always said, by and large, a 2- and 3-year-old can say their name or raise their hand or identify themselves. A 5-year-old can say what they like. A 7-year-old can say what their favorite class is. That's the part of becoming self-determined, realizing that that team, that those people are your team. And you should be requesting self-determination goals. And maybe that starts with asking your school district what their policy is on self-determination and decision-making and things like that. Because like we know, education, employment, and independent living is the key to special education. And we know that self-determination is the key to that. So that would be the first question I ask, because there was a study that said that I think 2/3 of teachers understood how important self-determination is, but less than 1/3 of schools actually had a policy to include self-determination as part of IEP goals. So request that. Say, we want goals that will build my child's choice-making ability. And that can be part of any topic. I mean, we see so many boring goals that say things like, the student shall reduce the number of times she is tardy. Big deal. What is that teaching if the student is late? It's just teaching you that you failed. What about a goal that says this? I will work with my teacher or my family or my para-educator or anyone to develop a plan that will make sure I am on time more often. Then you have to be self-determined. You come up with the plan. You have to work with other people. You work with your teacher, your family, whatever. You know what happens if it doesn't work? You need to develop a new plan. And just like that, without ever using the phrase self-determination, without ever using the phrase decision-making, you have created a goal called an I statement, again endorsed by U.S. Department of Education, that enforces and empowers and increases self-determination. And that's important because we have studies that show that when students have goals focused on self-determination, they become more self-determined and they do better in school and outside of school. They have a better quality of life. They are more likely to be educated. Outside of school, they're more likely to work and be independent. So how do we develop these goals? How do we develop self-determination in the school system? Well, if you've been to special education meetings, you know about the Individualized Education Plan, the IEP. And I have heard so many horror stories with IEP meetings. People saying that it's just school people talking at them rather than with them. Well, again, the U.S. Department of Education talks about the student-led IEP. That's a chance for the student to practice self-determination. In the student-led IEP, like I said, that student is there. And as the student gets older and consistent with his or her abilities, they lead the meeting. They could introduce people. They could talk to people. They could be talking about what they like and don't like. And as the student gets older and getting toward that 18-year-old part where you are an adult, the hope is that the student's in charge. The student is giving information to the team is giving information to the student, and together they develop goals and objectives that best serve the student. And what we know from research is that when we do that, when we do the student-led IEP, students do better. And yes, I know every student has different abilities. I'm not suggesting that every student does the same thing in every meeting, but I am suggesting that the more students do, the better their lives can be, the better their results can be, because we know that from science. They're better able to advocate themselves. They interact more positively with adults. They take more responsibility. They do all the things we want self-determined, effective, and powerful adults to do. Why? They practiced. Think about it. When you're leading your IEP meeting, when you're an active part of your IEP meeting, you are practicing making decisions. You are doing it in a place where you can develop relationships and trust, and then it becomes more easy and it can carry through the rest of your life. And when students get older, generally when they turn 16, some states say 14, you have a right to a thing called transition services. I call transition services the most important things out there because you're planning for the rest of the student's life. IEPs and special education run till age 22. Okay, 25 in one state. Life goes probably to 85. So in transition services, you are planning for the next 60 and 70 years. And the whole point of transition services, I often hear horror stories where people say, it's the end of the IEP meeting and we get to check a box. Do I want to work? Do I want to go to college? If I want to work, they refer me to a job counselor. If I want to go to college, they refer me to a guidance counselor. That is not transition services. What's up on your screen comes directly from the law. The whole point of transition services is to set up the child's life after school, which includes, look at the bold words, setting up education, setting up employment, setting up independent living services. And what do we know are the keys to that? Self-determination. In fact, the transition plan is supposed to be based on the child's needs, based on the child's strengths, preferences, and interests. How do we find that out? We talk to the child using the student-led IEP. And then what do we put together? Looking at the bottom, sports, services, experiences that help the child prepare post-school living objectives and acquiring daily living skills. In other words, transition services are a way to set the child on the path to self-determination by doing the things that we all have to do to progress from school out there. Because after education, what comes next in our life journey? Generally work. And even though transition services are supposed to set up employment, there's another way to do that, and one that I recommend that everyone pursue, whether they're in school or not, however old they are. Vocational rehabilitation, what I'm going to call VR services, are state-funded services. Every state has a VR program. If you don't know which one yours is, Google vocational rehabilitation, and whatever state you're in, and you will find a link to the agency, because VR programs, their entire point is to help prepare people with disabilities specifically, to prepare them to work, to get a job, keep a job, advance a job, or get a job back. If it has something to do with work, VR can provide it. And I'm going to show you how important that is in a second. But I recommend that everyone with disabilities apply for VR. It doesn't matter if you're 16 years old or 85. If you want to work, if you feel you have the ability to work, VR can help you work, and so much more. And being eligible for VR is not hard. Being eligible for special education or a Medicaid waiver can be hard. You have to meet certain criteria, fit in a category, pass a means test. Not VR. If you apply for VR, and there's a regulation at the bottom of your screen, that's the one that says this. If you have a disability, if you want to work, if your disability makes it harder for you to work, and VR will help you work, getting past whatever your disability makes it hard for you to do, you are eligible. In fact, if you receive public benefits like SSI, SSDI, Medicare, Medicaid, you are presumed to be eligible. So I always tell people, apply. It's hard not to be ineligible. You are presumed to want to work and to be able to work. If VR says you are too disabled to work, they have to prove it. And they have to prove that by giving you a chance to work. You don't have to prove you can work. They have to prove you can't work. And that is the most important part of VR. In fact, I have been working in VR across the country for years. I have never seen a person found ineligible. I have contested a couple of ineligibility decisions and won, but I have never seen a person who wasn't able to at least try and work through VR. And once you are found eligible, you get a plan. Just like the individualized education plan in education, in VR, you get a thing called the Individualized Plan for Employment, or IPE. In the IPE, you work with your VR counselor to develop an employment goal. And that is a goal you want to get that matches your abilities and interests. That's hugely important. A job you want. Some VRs try to push people with disabilities into certain kind of jobs. I call them the F jobs, food, filth, flowers, filing, fast food, light retail, janitorial, and light office. And if that's what you want to do, great. But if you think you're capable of more than that, if you have interests that go in other places and you're able to do that, VR should be helping you get that type of job. And the IPE also lays out what you need to reach that goal. It may be certain supports and services or skills you have to acquire now to get the job later, because VR can provide tons of supports and services. Take a look at your screen right now. This is just a few of the things that VR can provide. They can provide assessments to see where you need help, counseling to help you understand how to do an interview or how to act on the job, job search and retention services to help you find that job, assistive technology for everything from glasses to computers. I've seen so much covered. Medical and mental health care. If your health is keeping you from working, VR can pay for your health care. They can pay for educational expenses if you need an education to work. And yes, I have seen college paid for by VR. They provide on-the-job training, job coaches, transportation, and that time after time is the #1 thing I hear that keeps people with disabilities from working, transportation. Well, if transportation is keeping a person with disabilities from working, VR has to provide it. And it goes on and on. Even services to family member. If daycare is keeping you from being able to work because you have to care for a child, I have seen VR pay for daycare. So the opportunities are endless. And self-determination is built in to VR. Just like the student-led IEP is an opportunity to exercise self-determination, VR has its own method called informed choice. There's a regulation and a definition of informed choice right on your screen. What it means, all these words in the bold, means is this. My counselor is supposed to explain my options to me, to tell me, okay, you've told me you're interested in this and that. We have done these assessments which show these strengths and these abilities. You have told me these things you're interested in. Here are some opportunities we have that you may be interested in. Or you've told us that you want this job and we think you can do it. Here are some supports we think you need and some people we think can provide them. The entire job of the counselor is to tell me my options, to explain to me my opportunities so I can choose the job goal I want and the supports and services I want to get me there. So self-determination is built into the VR system. And that's so important because, again, VR is about work. And what do we know about self-determination and work? That people with disabilities who are more self-determined are more likely to work. So we ought to be using methods like these. We ought to be seeking out these types of supports and services that can build self-determination. In other parts of life, this works just as well. Healthcare. If you are involved in any publicly funded healthcare system like Medicare, Medicaid, or if you're working with a center for independent living, and if you're not, you should be, they're great. You've heard the phrase person-centered planning. Person-centered planning is a system designed to help people with disabilities identify and choose their own supports and services. What's on your screen right now, I pulled directly from Medicaid's website. This is their guide for person-centered planning. Let's take a look. So first, we have to make sure that a person-centered plan addresses health and long-term services in a manner that reflects individual preferences and goals. That's a really good definition of self-determination, isn't it? Reflects individual preferences and goals. People must have the opportunity to develop a plan that reflects their own interests and goals. And here's what has to be in the plan. Look at this. Individual identified goals and preferences, including community participation, employment, income and savings, healthcare and wellness, education, and others. Look at the bold words and look what that means. Education, employment, all those community participation, independent living services. What do we know leads to those types of things? We know it's self-determination, and it's even clearer when we think about what person-centered planning is supposed to do. And I pulled this directly from a leading person-centered planning trainer. Person-centered planning focuses on finding out what's important to the person and what's important for the person. It focuses on where the person is in their life's journey now and where the person wants to go, who that person wants to be in their lives, what they want to change and what they want to stay the same to get there. The counselor is supposed to work with the person to identify this, then tell the person his or her options so the person can choose and create that person-centered plan that reflects that person's individual preferences and goals and has all these opportunities. It is a perfect opportunity for self-determination. But life is more than just that. What about money management? I often think that the great divide that is still keeping people with disabilities from being seen as separate or not included in their community comes down to money management and savings. Because like Forbes magazine says on your screen, how can people with disabilities have a decent quality of life? How can you be part of your community? How can you do the things that make people part of their community if you only have very limited resources? If you're on SSI, SSDI, Medicare, Medicaid, you have heard about what I call the fiscal cliff. And what that means is that if you're getting those benefits, you can't have more than $2,000 to your name. I don't even mean $2,000 cash. I mean $2,000 of assets. The second you go over that $2,000 limit, or if someone is supporting you, if you have a parent who is letting you live rent-free, that's considered an asset, the value of the rent. Someone gives you a car, that's an asset. You get more than $2,000 in asset, you can lose your benefits. And as everyone who's on benefits knows, those are the things that keep you independent. That healthcare through Medicaid is the thing that keeps you living by yourself, on your own, independently. Well, if you lose that, how can you do that? So you're stuck. You're in what one professor I know calls a life sentence of poverty. If you want to be independent, you can't have the money that lets you actually live independently. And that's when a new law comes in called the ABLE Act, Achieving a Better Life Experience. And ABLE is so important because I just talked a little while ago about VR and work. What I hear from people with disabilities and parents and friends across the country is I can't work. People with disabilities can't work. If we work, we might go over the fiscal cliff and lose our benefits. And it keeps people with disabilities from working. The ABLE Act is designed to fix that. Again, ABLE, Achieving a Better Life Experience. The whole point of ABLE is it works like a 529 account. In fact, it is a 529 account. Most people have heard 529s about education. It's an account where you put money in for your kids, that money grows tax-free, and when you want to take it out to pay for college or education, you take it out tax-free. Think about ABLE as an education account except for life. What ABLE works is you can put up to $15,000 a year into an ABLE account without it having any impact on your benefits. You're allowed to put $15,000 a year into an ABLE account. It will not affect your benefits. And then that money grows tax-free, and it can be withdrawn tax-free to pay for living expenses. And you can have up to $101,999 in an ABLE account with no impact on your benefits. You have $102,000. What happens is you lose your SSI, or they're suspended, but you keep your Medicaid. Nice problem to have if you have $102,000. You can learn lots about the ABLE program, how to apply for it, how it works, by going to the ABLE National Resource Center's website. That's ablenrc.org. There's an address on your website, on the screen, pardon me. And it's easy to be eligible for ABLE. To be eligible for ABLE, you have to be getting SSI or SSDI, or you would get it if you applied. You have to show a certification from a doctor that you would meet the criteria for ABLE. So you're getting benefits, or you would get them if you applied. That's an important thing. There are some parents, my brother is one of them, who thinks their child might be going on benefits, but wants to give them every chance to work and have without being subject to that fiscal cliff. So my brother opened an ABLE account for his daughter. If she ever applies for benefits, the doctor said she would qualify if she applied. And if she ever does apply and gets it, she'll have an account there to help her. That's the beauty of ABLE. You can start planning now for the future. And on your screen are lots of tiny words. The reason those words are tiny are because those are all of the things ABLE accounts can be used for. You can use money, you can withdraw money in an ABLE account, remember, tax-free, to pay for all of these things. Everything from housing expenses like rent or a mortgage, education expenses for school or college or job training, employment expenses like transportation or job training, healthcare, premiums for health insurance, out-of-pocket costs, transportation, how to get places, and what I call life expenses. You can use them for recreation, to go to a show or a movie. You can use it to go on vacation. Why? Because that's part of the life experience. The whole point of ABLE is to give people with disabilities on benefits the opportunity to have a life experience like everyone else. In fact, I have not heard, maybe there's something you can't use an ABLE expense for. I haven't heard it. If you have questions, ablenrc.org is the place to go. And just like with special education, just like with VR, just like with person-centered planning, self-determination is built into the ABLE account. The whole point of ABLE is to support people with disabilities to have health, independence, and quality of life. What do we know leads to that? Self-determination. So with ABLE accounts, the person with disabilities decides how the money is spent. Now, there are accounts called special needs trusts you may have heard of that also don't count against benefits. The difference between an ABLE account and a special needs trust is if I have a special needs trust, I have to ask the trustee to give me money. If there's something I want to buy or do, the trustee has to okay it. With an ABLE account, the person with disabilities chooses. This means the person with disabilities can ask for help doing it. We're going to talk about a thing called supported decision-making in a minute. But the key is with an ABLE account, the person is in charge. In several states, the person can say, this is my account. I want mom, dad, brother, sister, whoever to have access to my account to help me use it. But ultimately, the person makes the decision. And that's huge. Making decisions, like I've shown you, is such a huge part of life. And that's why I want to finish up today by talking about guardianship. Many, many people with disabilities and parents ask me about guardianship. And I'm going to start when I talk about guardianship by saying there's nothing wrong with it. There is nothing wrong with guardianship when it's appropriate. Guardianship has been around since as long as we have laws. If I had more time, I would tell you that the first time in the Western world we put the laws in one place in a book called the Justinian Code in ancient Rome, they had a section talking about what we now call guardianship. So there's nothing wrong with guardianship when it's okay, when a person truly can't do things. And that's the point of guardianship. If a judge decides that I can't do some or all things or can't make some or all decisions. What that judge is supposed to do is figure out those few things, whatever they are, that I can't do and give someone else the power to do them. If guardianship worked that way, you would have no bigger fan of it than me. The problem is that what we know from years and years of studies is that people with disabilities get pushed into guardianship. There is a culture that pushes people with disabilities into guardianship and pushes parents into seeking guardianship. And again, I say there's nothing wrong with guardianship if it's appropriate. Where things get scary is that when people are pushed into the guardianships they don't need, or that take away more rights that they need to lose, then there's a problem. I call those overbroad and undue guardianships, ones that either I don't need or take away more rights than I need to lose. What we know is that over 90% of the guardianships, and one study found this, over 90% of guardianships take away all rights from the person, whether or not the person can exercise any of those rights. I had one judge say it's easier to check all the boxes than to figure out which ones to check. So what we know is that the vast majority of guardianships take away all rights. And here's something else we know. Right now, as you sit here listening to me today over a remote connection, consider how strange it would be to be doing this even 5 years ago. In this time when we have more technology, when we have more supports and services, when we have more legal rights like the ADA, we have more ways to make more people more independent than ever before. And yet what studies show is the estimated number of people under guardianship has tripled just since 1995. We've gone from an estimated 500,000 people under guardianship 25 years ago to over 1.5 million. And before you say it's because our population is aging, that's true. The most recent study said the fastest growing segment of the population under guardianship are young adults with disabilities, 18-year-olds. In fact, if you have disabilities and you are 18, you are more likely to be under guardianship than an 85-year-old. Why? Because that's been the culture, because a teacher or a lawyer or a family member says, this is what you have to do. That's what I want to talk to you about when we talk about guardianship. Not that you can't do it, but that we should think about it. Because what guardianship does, especially overbroad and undue guardianship, it takes away self-determination by definition, because the person loses the power to choose. As a couple of studies have found, guardians have substantial and often complete authority over the lives of people under guardianship, making the most basic decisions. Remember those basic rights I started with? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? If you're under guardianship, especially a full one, you don't have the right to make those basic decisions. And what we've known for even longer than we've known how good self-determination is, we have known how bad it is to lose it. As far back as 1975, there were studies finding that when people with disabilities lost their power to choose, they would feel helpless, hopeless, and self-critical. They would have lower self-esteem. They'd be less able to function. They'd be less likely to try new things. And that's not rocket science. If a judge tells you you're not allowed to do something, are you feeling particularly motivated to try? In almost all cases, no. We call that learned helplessness. So what I tell the people is not that guardianship is wrong or that you're evil if you're a guardian or that you're wrong to ever consider it. I tell them to think about it, because we shouldn't be jumping at it. We shouldn't be reflexive when it comes to guardianship, because research shows that people under guardianship, particularly people with disabilities who are in these guardianships that are overbroad or undue, it can have a significant negative impact on their physical and mental health. They can live less long, do less well, feel less well. But the research on the other side of that is really interesting too. What's up on your screen right now is from a study called the National Core Indicator Study. The National Core Indicator Study looked at the quality of life of people with disabilities across the country. It was done in almost every state. And what it was, I'm not a researcher, I'm a lawyer, so I call it apples to apples. I'm sure there's a scientific phrase for it. I call it apples to apples. They looked at people who are of similar abilities and limitations and compared them to people of similar abilities and limitations. So they even used the old phrases mild, moderate, and severe. They compared people with mild disabilities to mild disabilities, moderate, moderate, severe, severe. And what they did was they looked at the impact of certain things on quality of life. Just one of the things they looked at was whether or not a person had a guardian. And based on that one variable alone, whether or not they had a guardian. Remember, apples to apples. They found that people with disabilities who did not have guardians were more likely to work, live independently, have friends, go on a date and socialize in the community and practice the religion of their choice than people of similar abilities and limitations who had guardians. That study was done twice in the last decade, and both times it found the same thing. So what I tell people all the time is this: if we know, and now we do, that the one thing that could be standing in between having what's on your screen and not having what's on your screen is having a guardian, shouldn't we think about it? Shouldn't we not say that all these years of culture assuming guardianship is the only way forward, that they're too much? That it's time now to think and not to rush into it. And that's why I talk about supported decision-making as a way forward. The definition of supported decision-making is on your screen. I wrote it, so I'm supposed to be proud of it. I actually hate it. I mean, look at all those words. If you need to know what the clinical definition of supported decision-making, there it is. A recognized alternative to guardianship where people with disabilities work with friends, family members, and professionals to help them understand the situations and choices they face so they can make their own decision without the need for a guardian. What does that really mean? It really means this: how do you make decisions? If you're a person without disabilities, how do you make decisions? What do you do if you go to the doctor and the doctor speaks jargon? What do you do if you go to the auto mechanic and the auto mechanic speaks jargon at you? What do you do if you've got a decision that you have to make, but it's so personal to you, you know you can't be objective? What do you do if you're faced with something you don't understand that you have to do something with? You talk to people. That's what you do. You do research. You tell the doctor, can you please explain this in plain English? If you're like me, you have a buddy who knows more about cars and you call him up. If you're like me and your kids are having trouble in school, and that would be only on days that end in Y, you call your sister, who is a school administrator, for advice. We do this every day. So supported decision-making is nothing more or less than getting help when you need it to do the things you have to do. And we all do it. I needed supported decision-making to access this webinar, to figure out how to download the launcher for the program we're using that I'd never used before. But think about this. This is what I mean by saying it's just a lot of words for what we do every day. Think about all the cliches that we use every day about decision-making, that we hear every day. Don't make a snap judgment. Don't go off half-cocked. Make an informed choice. Consider your options. Those all just mean get help. In fact, if you're a person without disabilities, doing this, admitting that you don't know something and getting help to learn about it is a virtue. We are complimented for it. We are praised for not making a snap judgment, for making an informed choice. But for 1,500 plus years, people with disabilities, when they've said, I need some help to do something, society has assumed they can't do it. So what supported decision-making is designed to do is put people with disabilities in the same position as people without disabilities. Why? Because science shows. There's a quote up on your screen, and God willing, a bunch of studies about to come out that I've been a part of that show this. When people with disabilities use supported decision-making to make their own decisions, instead of having a guardian make decisions for them, when that happens, they have more self-determination. And that's not rocket science, because self-determination is having control over their lives. And if I am the one making decisions with support, then I have more control over my life. And what do we know about people who have more self-determined and life control? They have better lives. 40 to 50 years of science says they're more likely to be educated, employed, and live independently. And that's maybe why the National Guardianship Association, that is the National Guardianship Association, which is made up of, by, and for guardians, whose website is guardianship.org, who trains guardians, certifies guardians, and has educational materials for guardians. There is nobody more invested in guardianship than the National Guardianship Association. That's why they say, before seeking guardianship, try something else. Try supported decision-making, because it might work. It might empower your son, your daughter, your loved one to be able to make their own decisions without the need for a guardian, without having to lose their rights, without having to lose their self-determination. You know what? It might work. It might not work. And if it doesn't work, maybe guardianship's appropriate, but what's the rush? And the beauty of supported decision-making is something you already know. Just like you already know that you use supported decision-making every day, you just didn't call it that. You already know there's no one way to do it. You already know there's no one app or one model or one book that will tell you how to do supported decision-making, because we all make decisions in different ways. Some people just need what I call a listening ear or a supporting shoulder, someone to bounce ideas off of, to help them come to a decision. Other people like to have what I call go-to people. I go to this person for financial matters, that person for medical questions, that person for educational issues. And we can write that into a plan for people with disabilities, like a power of attorney, like an advance directive, like an individual support plan. Other people like to have very formal structures. We call those micro boards or circles of support, where we work with several people. We meet them regularly and we talk about my life and they give me their advice so that I can make my decision. Well, all of these, all of them are supported decision-making, because all of those examples involve me going to a person or several people so that I can understand the things I have to do, I can understand the choices I have to make, and that I can decide what I want to do. All of these are about me making the decision and me exercising self-determination. Here is the thing that I would say, that I can say that all forms of supported decision-making have in common. And something, 3, I call them commandments, that if you can agree to these, and they're easy, you can do supported decision-making. 1, make the realization, make the assumption, draw the conclusion that everyone has the right to make choices to the maximum of their ability. And that's easy. That's the Declaration of Independence. That's why I started there. We all have the right to choose our life, liberty, and the happiness we pursue. That's number 1. Number 2 is easier. If we agree that we all have the right to make choices, then we also agree that I can ask you for help with something. I can say, I know I have the right to make this choice, but I'm not sure I get it. Can you help me understand it? Without you saying, well, that must mean you can't do it, and trying to take my rights away. Well, that's easy too, because we do that every day. We ask for help. And last, we acknowledge that there are as many ways to give and get help as there are people. And that's true. Have you never gone to plan B? I go to plan triple Q all the time. The first thing you try to empower someone may not work. It doesn't mean a person can't make decisions. It just means maybe we haven't found the right key yet. So try something else. Something might work. Nothing might work. If nothing works, guardianship may well be appropriate. For more information on supported decision-making, including research, including guides and connections to laws in your state, the National Resource Center for Supported Decision-Making, which is federally funded. I am one of the project directors of it. You can see their website at supporteddecisionmaking.org. It's a great opportunity to look at information and material, hear testimonials from people who've used supported decision-making in their lives. Now, like I said, there's no one way to do this, but I do think there are simple guides that can help us do it. And I wrote them down here. They're in part of an article. If you are really interested, Google my last name and Impact Journal. But 5 steps, I think they're all easy. First, listen and think. Help the person identify the life areas where they want support, where we agree the person needs help making decisions. There are some areas we all need help in, some areas that I can't do right now in my life, but if I had help, I could do them pretty well. Walk through a conversation. There are tools that can help you do that. One is called the Missouri Stoplight Tool. Google it. It can help you identify life areas where people need help. And when you know where people need help, second step is figure out what kind of help the person wants. There is a 99.9% chance that person has used supported decision-making before to make some kind of decision, everything from what they want to eat to where they want to go to what they want to do with their lives. Someone has worked with someone else in some way to make a decision before. We'll explore that. Because if someone has a preferred way of working before, or it has worked before, or they have known someone before, it's probably going to work again. So we can try to build on what's worked well, or identify what hasn't worked well and avoid that. Once you know where you want help and what kind of help, next question is who can provide it? Who's in the person's life, or who could be in the person's life? There are plenty of agencies out there for people with disabilities. You're on a website for one of them that can give you advice and assistance and help link you with agencies in your area that can help you get support and services, or build networks to help you have someone you can talk to if you need to. Once you know where, what kind, and who, make a plan. Get your people together and say, okay, here's what I want to do, or here's how we can do this, like a personal board of directors meeting almost. I want to work with Jonathan, and I'm going to give Jonathan access to my financial records to make sure I'm not overspending. I'm going to work with Justin on medical matters, and that means I'm going to authorize Justin to come to the doctor with me, and he's going to help the doctor understand me, and me understand the doctor. And I'm going to work with Malcolm when it comes to interpersonal relationships. He can make sure I'm not making bad choices or give me advice when I need to make choices. And once you have that plan, this is not required, but I believe in putting things in writing. I believe in stuff. It doesn't have to be a formal thing. It could be a guide. I worked with one young lady in Virginia, and she just wrote a chart. And she brought that chart to our meeting and held it up and said, this says what I want, who's going to help me, and what they're going to do. That's it. And I said, my God, that is it. But having it in writing makes it real. It lets it be more accountable. It lets it be more real. You can share things with others. And you can put it in writing in a power of attorney. If you're in one of the 13 states that recognizes supported decision-making agreements, you can make a supported decision-making agreement. But you can put SDM in anything. Remember the example I gave you in the I statement goal? That I statement, I will work with my teacher to develop a plan that will ensure I'm on time for class. That's all about supported decision-making. I'm working with my teacher to develop a plan. So we can include supported decision-making in anywhere, because SDM connects everything we talked about today. Supported decision-making and self-determination are the connective tissue of everything we talked about today. We talked about the student-led IEP. Student sits at the head of the table, works with the team, gives them information, gets information, and together they develop goals that best suit the child's needs. That's just supported decision-making. Informed choice in vocational rehabilitation. My counselor talks to me about my options and what jobs I might like and what supports I might need and what providers I might choose so I can choose them. That's just supported decision-making. Person-centered planning. My counselor finds out what's important to and for me, what my goals are and where I want to go, so the counselor can tell me what supports and services are out there that can help me get there, and I can choose them. That's supported decision-making. Informed consent in medical care. End-of-life planning. All of these are supported decision-making. And ABLE accounts. Like I said, you can designate a person to have access to your account who can give me advice and help me understand what and when and how I should put money in and take money out. That's just supported decision-making. And together that creates self-determination, and self-determination creates a better quality of life. And that's where I'm going to end with you today. I told you there's a culture, and you know it too, a culture that assumes people with disabilities can't do things, that assumes people with disabilities cannot or should not be part of the same world as everyone else. We can change that culture. That changes the world. And yes, I know change the world is a cliche, but bear with me. If we empower people to make choices, if we respect people to make choices, if we advance people's right to make choices, if we protect people's right to make choices, then everything changes, because choice making is what makes our rights. If we say, Jonathan, I'm going to empower you instead of I'm going to diminish you. If we say we're going to build on your strengths rather than assume your limitations, then that changes everything. And every time you do it for one person, it becomes easier for the next person because there's more familiarity. That's how culture changes, one person at a time. We did it for Jonathan. Let's try it for Wendy. We did it for Wendy. We know we can do it for Malcolm. That's how that works. One person, one decision at a time, until people with disabilities are, in fact, finally seen as having all the rights as everyone else. We've known forever they do have all the rights, but the culture has suggested that society doesn't accept that. Well, one person at a time, we can change that. In my introduction, they talked about a young woman I represented named Jenny Hatch to ensure her right to use supported decision-making instead of being under guardianship. That case took a year. 6 days of trial. The next one was 1 day. The next one I knew of was in Indiana that didn't even go to trial. With one affidavit, the judge got rid of the guardianship. Why? Because now it was known and it was accepted. And that's how we change the world, one person at a time. And that is so important because that's for all of us. Because for all of us, supports and service ends, school ends, we stop working, healthcare comes to a place where it ends. And what's left are not people with disabilities, but people. They're not people with disabilities using supported decision-making. They're people making choices. That's the world we want. Not one where we have to put labels on things, but where self-determination isn't a thing. It's just how we live. And if we believe in that, if we buy into that, then yes, we can change the culture and change the world. And if we don't, then we better hope we die quickly. We better hope we die suddenly. Because if you're not lucky enough to die suddenly, if you're a person without disabilities and you're not lucky enough to die suddenly, you know what you're going to be one day? You're going to be old. You're going to be infirm or disabled. You're going to be part of the system. And what kind of system do you want? Do you want that one that respects your abilities, that respects your rights, that respects your potential and builds on it? If you do, then this is what we should be doing because it's for you as much as it's for everyone else. That's the kind of world we can live in, and we can change it with this one simple idea: respecting, protecting, and advancing self-determination. As I promised, that is my email on your screen right now. You can contact me anytime there. I'm happy to answer any questions now. I'm happy to answer any questions in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan. I can't believe all that information. You weren't kidding when it was like 6 hours worth of information.
Again, I'm very happy to provide more in the future and give you links to some written material. But yeah, I did fly through that, and I apologize for talking.
No, I am just astonished with all that information I just learned. And I want everyone to know too that I will send this out as well with our survey, just because the information is so invaluable. We do have a question that has come in. It says, I'm a disabled adult living in Ohio. I've chosen to work my entire life and not utilize any support but I am currently not available to work in the same capacity due to my disability. I want to go back to college and obtain my master's so I can move into a less physically demanding position. Where would you suggest I seek help?
First place is the vocational rehabilitation office in your state. VR, which is what I described, their whole job, again, is to empower people with disabilities to work. VR is not wish fulfillment. They can pay for college. They can pay for a master's if those things are needed to help you overcome whatever limitations your disability causes. And as you said, if there's a physically demanding job and because of your disability, you're no longer able to work that physically, then if you show to VR that you can make a job and perform in a job, but that job requires a master's, then the argument would be, this is something I need to get to my employment level. And there is no doubt that VR can pay for college. Now, like I said, it's not wish fulfillment. They have to agree with it. It has to be part of your educational process. But I certainly know that VR has paid for it. In fact, an attorney I once hired had used VR to get her law degree because she needed a law degree and that was her job goal and she was qualified for it.
Very interesting. We just had a person type in, yes, we are going, this has been recorded. So all this information that you just heard has been recorded and I will be sending it out to everyone. I do not see anything else that has popped up. Jonathan, thank you doesn't seem to be enough for all this information, but I definitely appreciate your time on Saturday. And I know that you've got a busy schedule, so I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you very much.
Before we wrap up, to the one gentleman in Ohio, the website for the vocational rehabilitation office in your state, they're called Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities. So the website is ood.ohio, the entire word, .gov. And again, that's my email. If you have any questions or need any kind of information about that, please feel free to email me.
That's great. Thank you again. I can't thank you enough. Thank you.
Thank you.